Eleanor Caldwell's knees hit the frozen ground outside the general store. Her arms tightened around Tommy's burning body as her two older children pressed against her back. 8 months since Daniel died. 8 months of begging. And now the coldest night of the year, and every door in Thunder Creek had closed in her face. "Please," she whispered to no one. "Please, God, not my children." That's when the wagon stopped. That's when Silas Blackwood's shadow fell across her. That's when everything changed. Before we continue this incredible journey, I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel and follow Eleanor's story until the very end. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'm always amazed to see how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to the beginning. 8 months earlier, Eleanor Caldwell had been a wife. She'd had a small house near the railroad tracks, a husband who came home tired, but smiling, and the certainty that tomorrow would look much like today. Then, the bridge collapsed. 14 men went into the frozen river that February morning. Daniel Caldwell was one of them. They pulled his body out 3 days later, still wearing the company jacket he'd been so proud of. The railroad company gave her 2 weeks to vacate the company housing. 2 weeks to figure out how a 34-year-old widow with 3 children and 47 cents to her name was supposed to survive in Wyoming territory. She'd figured it out. Barely. For 8 months she'd figured it out, until tonight. "Mama!" Sam's voice cut through the howling wind. "Tommy's getting worse." Eleanor shifted her youngest son against her chest, feeling the terrifying heat radiating through his thin blanket. 2 years old. Too young to understand why they were huddled behind Murphy's feed store instead of in a warm bed. Too young to fight the fever that had been climbing for 3 days. "I know, baby." She pulled Sam closer with her free arm, feeling Grace burrow deeper into her side. "I know." "We could try the church again," Sam suggested, but his voice held no hope. At 9 years old, he'd learned too much about hope and its limits. Reverend Crane wasn't there. Eleanor kept her voice steady. "We'll try again tomorrow." What she didn't say, they might not survive until tomorrow. The temperature had been dropping all day. The storm that had been threatening since morning was finally arriving, and the wind had teeth. "I'm cold, Mama." Grace's small voice trembled. 6 years old, and she hadn't complained once in 8 months. Not when they'd lost the house. Not when they'd sold everything but the clothes on their backs. Not when dinner became whatever scraps Eleanor could find or earn. If Grace was complaining, things were bad. "I know, sweetheart. Come here." Eleanor opened her threadbare coat, pulling Grace against her body heat. It wasn't enough. Nothing was enough anymore. Tommy coughed a wet, rattling sound that made Eleanor's heart clench. She'd been a midwife for 12 years. She knew what that cough meant. She knew her son needed warmth medicine, proper care, things she couldn't provide crouching behind a feed store in a blizzard. "Sam?" She made her voice firm, commanding. "Take your sister and Tommy. Stay here against the wall. I'm going to try one more door." "Mama, no. Stay here, Samuel. Watch your brother and sister. I'll be back." She transferred Tommy's burning body to Sam's arms, watching her eldest son cradle his baby brother with heartbreaking gentleness. 9 years old, and he'd become a father in all the ways that mattered. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes, take them to the livery. Mr. Henderson might let you sleep in the hay." "He won't?" Sam's jaw tightened. "He said we were bad for business. Said people don't want to board their horses where vagrants sleep." Vagrants. That's what they'd become. Not the widow of a man who'd died building this territory's railroad. Not a skilled midwife who'd delivered half the babies in this town. Vagrants. "Then try the Chinese laundry. Mrs. Wong was kind last week." "Yes, Mama." Eleanor pressed her lips to Sam's forehead, then Grace's, then Tommy's. Her youngest was too hot, burning up from the inside, while the world froze around them. "I love you," she said. "All of you. More than anything." "We know, Mama." Grace's small hand found hers in the darkness. "We love you too." Eleanor forced herself to stand. forced herself to walk away from her children, forced herself around the corner of the feed store into the full fury of the storm. Thunder Creek's main street stretched before her, barely visible through the swirling snow. Lights glowed in windows, warm, golden, unreachable lights. Behind those windows, families sat down to dinner. Children complained about vegetables. Husbands kissed wives. Behind those windows, people who had known Daniel, who had eaten at her table, who had held her babies, pretended Eleanor Caldwell didn't exist. She started walking. First stop, the Mercantile. She knocked on the side door, the one that led to the Hendersons' living quarters above the store. Footsteps. A pause. The door cracked open, revealing Mrs. Henderson's pinched face. "Mrs. Caldwell, we're closed." "I know. I'm sorry. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't my youngest is very sick. If we could just sit by your stove for a few hours until the storm passes." "I'm sorry." Mrs. Henderson didn't sound sorry. "My husband doesn't want any trouble. Please, he's 2 years old. He might not survive the night without warmth." Something flickered in Mrs. Henderson's eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or fear. Fear of what Eleanor couldn't imagine. Fear of catching poverty. Fear of compassion. "You should try the church." "The church is locked. Reverend Crane is out of town." "Then perhaps the saloon. They're always open." "Mrs. Henderson." "Good night, Mrs. Caldwell. I'll pray for your family." The door closed. Eleanor heard the lock engage. She stood there for a moment, snow accumulating on her shoulders, and felt something crack inside her. Not break, she couldn't afford to break, but crack like ice on a pond. One more weight, and she would shatter. She moved on. The boarding house. No vacancy. The doctor's office. "Dr. Holloway is out on a call. Try tomorrow." The dry goods store, no answer at all, though Eleanor could see movement behind the curtains. She was halfway to the saloon, her last desperate option, when she heard the voice. "Well, well, if it isn't the railroad widow." Eleanor's blood went cold before she turned. She knew that voice. Everyone in Thunder Creek knew that voice. Cornelius Whitmore stood in the doorway of his bank, silhouetted against the warm glow within. He was dressed for dinner, fine wool coat, silk cravat, watch chain, glinting gold against his vest. Everything about him gleamed with wealth and self-satisfaction. "Mr. Whitmore." "Cold night to be walking." He stepped onto the boardwalk, pulling the door partially closed behind him. "Where are your children?" "Safe." "Are they?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I heard your youngest is ill. Terrible thing, childhood fever. So many little ones don't survive." Eleanor's hands clenched at her sides. "What do you want, Mr. Whitmore?" "Want." He pressed a hand to his chest in mock offense. "Can't a man express concern for a struggling neighbor? We're not neighbors." "No." He moved closer. Close enough that Eleanor could smell his cologne, his dinner, the whiskey on his breath. "But we could be." "I don't understand." "I think you do." His voice dropped intimate. "You're a beautiful woman, Eleanor. Even now, even after everything. And I'm a man with resources. Resources that could help your children." The implication hung in the air between them, obscene and unmistakable. "I'd rather freeze," Eleanor said quietly. Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Something ugly. "Be careful, Mrs. Caldwell. Pride is a luxury. Your children are dying while you cling to virtue that won't warm them or fill their bellies." He stepped back toward his door. "When you're ready to be reasonable, you know where to find me." The door closed. Eleanor stood alone on the boardwalk, shaking with rage and cold and despair. She had no more doors to knock on, no more hope to exhaust. The storm was getting worse, and somewhere behind Murphy's feed store, her children were waiting for her to save them. She couldn't save them. The realization hit her like a physical blow. For 8 months she'd fought. For 8 months she'd scraped and begged and sold everything except her dignity. And now, on the coldest night of the year, she was out of options. Tommy was going to die. Maybe they all were. Eleanor Caldwell sank to her knees in the snow and did something she hadn't done since Daniel's funeral. She prayed. "Please." The word was barely a whisper. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll give anything. Just don't take my children. Please, God, don't take my children." The wind howled, the snow fell, and in that moment, Eleanor was absolutely alone. Then she heard hoofbeats. She raised her head, squinting through the blizzard. A wagon was coming down the main street, a large wagon pulled by two massive draft horses, moving steadily despite the storm. The driver was a dark shape on the bench, broad-shouldered and straight-backed. As the wagon approached, Eleanor pushed herself to her feet. She didn't know who this was, didn't know if they would help or harm. But she was out of options, and her children were dying. "Please," she called out. The wagon slowed, stopped. The driver turned to look at her, and Eleanor's heart dropped. She knew that face. Everyone in Wyoming Territory knew that face. Silas Blackwood, the Blackwood of Blackwood Ranch, the man they called the Ice King, the man who had turned one of the largest cattle operations in the territory into something approaching an empire, the man who, according to town gossip, hadn't smiled since his wife died 4 years ago. He looked at Eleanor with eyes the color of winter sky expression, as readable as stone. Mrs. Caldwell. He knew her name. Of course he did. Everyone knew the railroad widow. "Mr. Blackwood," her voice cracked. "I'm sorry to stop you. I know it's not your concern, but my children, my youngest is very sick, and every door, where are they?" The question cut through her stumbling explanation like a knife. "Behind Murphy's feed store. I told them to wait." Silas Blackwood was already climbing down from the wagon. He moved like a man half his age, hitting the ground and striding past her before she could finish speaking. "Wait, Mr. Blackwood?" He didn't answer. Eleanor scrambled after him, following his dark figure around the corner of the feed store. Sam saw them first. He was on his feet, instantly positioning himself between the stranger and his siblings, chin raised in defiance despite his obvious terror. "It's all right, Sam." Eleanor pushed past Blackwood. "He's here to help." "Is he?" Sam didn't lower his guard. "Why?" It was a fair question. One Eleanor couldn't answer. Silas Blackwood looked at the 3 children huddled against the wall, the defiant boy, the shivering girl, the feverish baby, and something shifted in his expression. So subtle, Eleanor would have missed it if she hadn't been watching. A crack in the stone. "Your brother." He addressed Sam directly, man to man. "How long has he been fevered?" Sam hesitated, looking to Eleanor. "It's all right," she said. "Answer him." 3 days. Sam's voice steadied as he found his footing in practical matters. "It started small but keeps getting worse. He won't eat, won't take water, just sleeps and coughs." Blackwood moved closer, crouching down to Sam's level. "May I?" Sam looked at his mother again. She nodded. Carefully, Sam transferred Tommy to Blackwood's arms. Eleanor watched, hardly breathing, as the Ice King of Wyoming Territory cradled her sick baby against his chest. His large hands were gentle. His expression was focused intent. "Respiratory infection," he said after a moment. "Advanced but not past treatment." He looked up at Eleanor. "He needs warmth, proper medicine, and rest. Can you provide those things?" The question wasn't cruel. It was practical. A simple assessment of reality. "No." Eleanor's voice didn't shake. "I can't." Blackwood nodded as if he'd expected that answer. He rose, Tommy still in his arms. "Your wagon," he said. "Where is it? We don't have a wagon anymore. We've been—" Eleanor stopped, swallowing her pride. "We've been finding shelter where we can." "For how long?" 3 months. Since I sold the wagon for medicine." Something flickered across Blackwood's face. The crack widened. "Get your children!" His voice was the same, flat, commanding, but something underneath had changed. "We're leaving." "Mr. Blackwood." "Now." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even an offer. It was an order delivered with the absolute authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Sam stepped forward. "Where are you taking us?" "Blackwood Ranch." Silas met the boy's suspicious gaze without flinching. 15 miles north. Warm house, full pantry, and a housekeeper who'll have soup ready before we arrive." "Why would you help us?" Sam demanded. Nobody helps us. Not anymore. The question hung in the freezing air. Eleanor watched Blackwood's face, waiting for the catch, waiting for him to reveal what he really wanted. Instead, he looked down at Tommy, whose small fist had curled unconsciously into the fabric of Blackwood's coat. "Because I know what it is to lose someone." His voice was quiet. "And I won't watch a child die when I can prevent it." The words were simple, sincere. And they cracked something in Eleanor's chest, something she'd been holding together with pure will for 8 months. "Why should we trust you?" Sam pressed. 9 years old and fighting like a grown man for his family. Blackwood studied the boy with something that might have been respect. "You shouldn't. Not yet. Trust is earned, not given." He shifted Tommy carefully in his arms. "But your brother will die tonight if you stay here. That's not trust, that's mathematics." Sam looked at Eleanor, his young face torn between suspicion and desperate hope. "Mama!" Eleanor made her decision. Later, she would wonder if it was madness or providence. In that moment, it felt like the only choice left. "Get your sister Sam. We're going with Mr. Blackwood." 5 minutes later, they were in the wagon. Blackwood had produced thick buffalo robes from somewhere probably kept for exactly this kind of emergency, and wrapped all 3 children like packages. Eleanor sat beside him on the driver's bench, Tommy back in her arms, as they rolled through the empty streets of Thunder Creek. They passed the bank. The windows were still lit, and Eleanor could see Cornelius Whitmore's silhouette behind the glass watching their departure. "You've made an enemy," she said quietly. Blackwood didn't look at the bank. "I've had enemies before. They don't particularly concern me." He should. He's powerful here. So am I. It wasn't boasting. It was simple fact. And I have longer reach than he does. They passed the edge of town, and suddenly they were alone on the open road, surrounded by nothing but snow and darkness, and the sound of horses' hooves. The storm seemed less fierce here, away from the buildings. Or maybe Eleanor was just warming up enough to think clearly. "Mr. Blackwood." "Silas." "What?" "My name is Silas." He kept his eyes on the road, navigating by instinct through the near whiteout conditions. "We're going to be sharing a house until spring. Mr. Blackwood will get tedious." Silas, then. The name felt strange in her mouth, too familiar for a stranger. "I need to understand what you expect from this arrangement." "Expect? In exchange for your help. What do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that Eleanor's heart began to pound. Long enough that every warning she'd ever heard about isolated ranches and desperate women began echoing in her head. "Your youngest is sick," Silas said finally. "Your other 2 are malnourished and exhausted. You're barely standing yourself." He glanced at her just briefly. "What I expect is that you'll accept my hospitality without treating every kindness like a transaction." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." His jaw tightened. "I'm not Whitmore, Mrs. Caldwell. I don't trade in desperation." "Then why stop? Why help? You don't know us." "I knew your husband." The statement hit Eleanor like cold water. "What?" "Daniel Caldwell. He worked a survey crew that crossed my land 2 summers ago. Good man, careful worker." Silas's voice remained steady, but something in it had shifted. "He talked about you and the children constantly, said his wife was the strongest woman in the territory, said his kids were going to change the world." Eleanor's eyes burned. She pressed her face into Tommy's hair, breathing in his familiar scent, using the physical anchor to keep from breaking apart. "He died building that railroad," she managed. "Building something for this territory, and the territory let us starve." "I know." "You knew." Something sharp crept into her voice. "You knew we were struggling. Everyone knew. And no one did anything. Would you have accepted help if it was offered?" The question stopped her, because the answer was complicated, because for months she had refused charity when it was offered, when it came with strings or pity or judgment, because Eleanor Caldwell had her pride, even when pride was all she had left. "I don't know," she admitted. "I do." Silas's voice was matter of fact. You would have said no. You would have insisted you could manage. You would have taken odd jobs and scraps before accepting what looked like charity. He paused. So I waited. Waited for what? For you to reach the point where acceptance was the only option left. He glanced at her again. For you to be desperate enough to get in my wagon. It should have felt manipulative, calculated. Instead, it felt like being truly seen for the first time in months. That's presumptuous, Eleanor said. It's practical. The ghost of something that might have been amusement crossed his face. I've dealt with stubborn people before. I'm not stubborn. You spent 3 months sleeping in a broken wagon rather than accept Whitmore's help. You're stubborn, Mrs. Caldwell. It's not an insult. Eleanor didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, watching the snow swirl in the weak lamplight that hung from the wagon's front. Behind them, Sam's voice rose in the darkness. Mama, are we going to be okay? Eleanor turned, finding her eldest's eyes in the dim light. He had Grace pressed against his side, both of them bundled in buffalo robes, looking smaller than they had any right to be. Yes, baby. She made her voice steady, strong, the voice of a mother who had never doubted. We're going to be okay. Sam held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded and pulled Grace closer, accepting her reassurance, even if he didn't quite believe it. The wagon rolled on through the storm. An hour later, they crested a rise, and Blackwood Ranch spread out below them, a collection of buildings surrounding a large 2-story house, all of it glowing with warm light against the darkness. Even through the snow, Eleanor could see the scale of it. The main house alone was bigger than anything in Thunder Creek. That's your home? Grace's voice was awed. That's home, Silas confirmed. And for now, it's yours too. As they descended toward the ranch, Eleanor saw a door open in the main house. A woman's figure appeared silhouetted against the light. She started walking toward them before the wagon had even reached the yard. That's Rosa, Silas said. My housekeeper. She's been with me 12 years. She'll have questions, but she'll help first and ask later. The wagon stopped in front of the house. Rosa was already there, reaching up before Eleanor could climb down. Give me the baby. Her voice was firm, accented, allowing no argument. You inside. Now. All of you. Rosa, Silas began. Don't Rosa me. 4 half-frozen people in the middle of the worst storm in 10 years, and you want to talk? She already had Tommy in her arms, already moving toward the house. Talk later. Warm now. Eleanor found herself bundled inside before she could form a coherent thought. The house was warm, blissfully, overwhelmingly warm and bright with lamplight and fire glow. She had a vague impression of fine furniture, polished floors, a massive stone fireplace, but most of her attention was on Rosa, who was already unwrapping Tommy with practiced hands. How long fevered? 3 days. It's gotten worse since... I can see that. Rosa's fingers were gentle despite her sharp tone. Respiratory. Need steam, need medicine, need rest. She looked up at Eleanor, really looked at her for the first time. Dark eyes assessing but not unkind. You know this. You're medical. It wasn't a question. Eleanor nodded. Midwife. Some general nursing. Good. You'll help me. Silas. She raised her voice without looking away from the baby. The blue room. Have Tobias bring hot water. And the medicine chest. Already done. Silas was stripping off his snow-covered coat, moving with efficient purpose. Sam, Grace, are you hungry? The children looked at Eleanor, still uncertain. She nodded. It's all right. Go with Mr. Blackwood. I need to help your brother. Sam's jaw tightened. He wanted to stay. Wanted to help. Wanted to do something, but he took Grace's hand and followed Silas toward what Eleanor assumed was the kitchen. Alone with Rosa and Tommy, Eleanor finally allowed herself to breathe. He's bad, she said quietly. Worse than I let the other children see. I know. Rosa was already moving toward the stairs, Tommy cradled against her chest. But not too bad, not yet. Come, we work. For the next 3 hours, Eleanor and Rosa fought for Tommy's life. Steam treatments, herbal remedies that Rosa produced from a surprisingly well-stocked medicine cabinet, careful temperature monitoring, cool cloths for the fever, warm cloths for the chest. At some point, Silas appeared in the doorway with coffee and sandwiches. He didn't speak, just left the tray and vanished, respecting their focus. Later, Eleanor would remember that detail. The coffee was fresh, the sandwiches carefully made. He had prepared them himself. Around midnight, Tommy's fever broke. Eleanor felt it happen, felt her son's skin shift from burning to merely warm, felt his breathing ease from desperate rattling to steady rhythm. She pressed her face against his small chest and let herself cry for the first time in 8 months. He'll live. Rosa's hand was warm on her shoulder. Little ones are strong, stronger than we think. Thank you. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. I did what anyone would do. Rosa paused. What anyone should do. Eleanor looked up, wiping her eyes. Not anyone. Not the people in town. Rosa's expression shifted, something hard and knowing entering her eyes. Town people. She made the words sound like a curse. They forget where they came from. Forget what it is to need help. She shook her head. Senor Blackwood, he doesn't forget. Never forgot. Why did he help us? Eleanor asked. The truth. Rosa was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than it had been all night. 4 years ago, his wife died. Beautiful Elizabeth. Died giving birth, and the baby died too. She crossed herself. Senor Blackwood, he blamed himself. Said he should have brought a doctor from Denver. Should have done something different. Couldn't save them, and it broke something in him. I heard, Eleanor said quietly. Everyone has heard the story. They hear the story. They don't understand it. Rosa's eyes met hers. He couldn't save Elizabeth. Couldn't save his son. But tonight, he could save yours. She gestured to Tommy, sleeping peacefully now. Maybe that's why. Or maybe he's just a good man who saw suffering and couldn't walk past it. Does the reason matter? Eleanor looked at her son, alive, breathing, because a stranger had stopped his wagon on the coldest night of the year. No, she said finally. I suppose it doesn't. Dawn came slowly, gray light creeping through the windows of the blue room, so named Eleanor learned for its curtains and bedding, all in varying shades of sky and sea. She had dozed fitfully in a chair beside Tommy's cradle, waking every hour to check his temperature, his breathing, his color. Each check brought better news. By sunrise, he was genuinely sleeping, his small face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for days. A soft knock at the door made her straighten. Come in. Silas entered, still in his work clothes despite the hour. He must have been up all night too, though doing what Eleanor couldn't guess. How is he? Better. Much better. She couldn't keep the relief from her voice. The fever broke around midnight. He's breathing clearly. I think the worst has passed. Silas nodded, something in his expression easing slightly. Good, that's good. He hesitated, the first uncertainty Eleanor had seen from him. Your other children are asleep in the room next door. Sam refused to leave until I promised to wake him if anything changed with his brother. That sounds like Sam. He's protective. It wasn't quite a question. He's been the man of the family since Daniel died, or he's tried to be. Eleanor sighed, pushing hair back from her face. He's 9 years old, and he's been carrying the weight of us all. That burden can be shared now. Silas moved further into the room, his footsteps quiet on the thick rug. If you'll allow it. Mr. Blackwood, Silas. Eleanor made herself meet his eyes. I need to understand what happens next. I can't just accept indefinite charity. It's not who I am. I know. He settled into the chair across from her, his large frame somehow not overwhelming the delicate furniture. I've thought about that. And my housekeeper is getting older. She'll deny it, but the work is hard on her, especially in winter. I need someone to help her, someone with medical knowledge, organizational skills, the ability to manage a household. He paused. Someone who can teach me not to be such a cold son of a... He stopped, glancing at the sleeping baby. Someone who can teach Grace to read and keep Sam from trying to run my ranch single-handedly. Eleanor stared at him. You're offering me employment. Room and board for you and the children plus fair wages. Formal contract. He met her gaze steadily. It's not charity. It's a business arrangement. One that benefits us both. Why would you do this? Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. You don't know me. You don't know if I can do the work, if my children will behave, if... Your husband talked about you, Silas interrupted. For 2 weeks while his crew surveyed my land, he talked about his family every chance he got. His wife who could handle any medical emergency. His son who was already smarter than most men he'd met. His daughter who asked questions about everything. His baby who laughed at everything. Something shifted in his expression. I know you, Mrs. Caldwell. I just hadn't met you yet. Tears burned Eleanor's eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to cry again. This arrangement, she said carefully. It's strictly professional. Strictly professional. He didn't look away. You'll have your own quarters, complete privacy. I have no interest in... He stopped, seeming to choose his words carefully. I'm not Whitmore. I don't want a woman who feels obligated. I want a household that functions. That's all. Eleanor studied him, this strange, closed-off man who had appeared from a blizzard and offered salvation. There were shadows behind his eyes, scars she couldn't see. He was hiding something. Everyone had something to hide, but she couldn't sense danger in him. Just pain. Old pain, carefully contained. I have conditions, she said. Something that might have been surprise flickered across his face. Name them. My children come first. Always. If I have to choose between your household and their welfare, I choose them. Agreed. I won't be treated as less than because of my circumstances. I was a respected midwife before Daniel died. I expect to be treated with that same respect here. Agreed. And if either of us decides this arrangement isn't working, I leave freely. No obligations, no debts. Silas nodded slowly. Fair terms. I have one condition of my own, which is, stay through spring. His voice was quiet, but firm. 3 months minimum. Long enough for your children to recover properly. Long enough for you to regain your strength. If you want to leave after that, I won't stop you, but give me 3 months. Eleanor considered this. 3 months of warmth and food and safety. 3 months for Tommy to recover, for Sam to stop carrying the world, for Grace to be a child again. 3 months to figure out what came next. Agreed, she said. Silas extended his hand. Eleanor took it. His grip was firm, his palm calloused from work. Welcome to Blackwood Ranch, Mrs. Caldwell. Eleanor, she corrected. If we're going to share a household, Mrs. Caldwell will get tedious. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but closer than anything she'd seen from him. Eleanor, then. He released her hand and rose. Get some rest. Rosa will take the next watch with your son. You haven't slept properly in days. I'm fine. You're exhausted, and you're no good to anyone if you collapse. He moved toward the door. Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor. No. He paused at the threshold, looking back. But I know what happens when people push too hard for too long. Rest, Eleanor. Your children need you healthy. He was gone before she could argue. Eleanor sat in the quiet room, watching her son breathe, and tried to make sense of the last 12 hours. Yesterday, she had been dying in the snow with her children. Today, she had a roof over her head, food in her belly, and a job offer from the most enigmatic man in Wyoming territory. It felt like a dream, or a fairy tale, or a trap. But Tommy was alive. Sam and Grace were safe and warm. And for the first time in 8 months, Eleanor Caldwell had something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Outside, the storm had finally passed. Weak sunlight filtered through the curtains, catching on fresh snow, making the world glitter like diamonds. A new day. A new beginning. Eleanor didn't trust it yet. Didn't trust him yet. But she would stay. For 3 months, she would stay. And maybe, just maybe, she would find out what Silas Blackwood was really hiding behind those winter gray eyes. The first week passed in a blur of small adjustments and careful observations. Eleanor learned the rhythms of Blackwood Ranch quickly. Rosa ran the household with iron efficiency, assigning tasks each morning and expecting them completed by evening. The work was hard but fair, and Eleanor found herself grateful for the structure after months of chaos. Tommy improved daily. By the 4th day, he was sitting up and demanding food with the imperious certainty of a healthy 2-year-old. By the 6th day, he was toddling around the kitchen, getting underfoot and charming Rosa, despite her best efforts to remain stern. "That one," Rosa said, watching Tommy attempt to climb onto a chair. "He has his mother's stubbornness." "Is that a compliment or a complaint?" "Both." Rosa's lips twitched. "He will be trouble when he's older. The good kind of trouble." Grace adapted fastest of all 3 children. She discovered the library on her 2nd day and had barely emerged since working her way through picture books with determined concentration. Silas had found her there one evening, surrounded by volumes twice her size, and had simply sat down and started reading aloud. Eleanor had watched from the doorway, something strange turning in her chest at the sight of her daughter curled against the arm of a man she barely knew, listening to stories about knights and dragons and faraway kingdoms. Sam was the holdout. He did his chores without complaint. He was polite to Rosa, respectful to Silas, gentle with his siblings. But there was a wall behind his eyes that hadn't been there before Thunder Creek. A wariness that made Eleanor's heart ache. "He doesn't trust me." Silas observed one evening, finding Eleanor alone in the kitchen after the children had gone to bed. "He doesn't trust anyone." Eleanor set down the dish she'd been drying. "Not anymore." Can't blame him for that. Silas moved to the stove, pouring himself coffee from the pot Rosa always kept warm. "Boy's been through more than most men, twice his age." "He used to be different. Before Daniel died." Eleanor's voice caught slightly. "He used to laugh all the time, ask questions about everything, dream about being an explorer or a scientist or a railroad engineer like his father. And now he just survives, day to day, protecting his brother and sister because he thinks no one else will." Silas was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup. "I was 12 when my father died, 14 when my mother followed. I had 2 younger brothers depending on me." Eleanor looked at him, surprised by the unexpected disclosure. "I remember that feeling," he continued. "Like the world had shifted and you were the only thing holding your family together. Like if you relaxed for even a moment, everything would fall apart. What happened to your brothers?" "One died in the war. The other lives in San Francisco now. Married a lawyer's daughter. Has 3 children of his own." Something flickered across his face. "We don't speak often." "Why not?" Silas set down his cup. "Because I was more father than brother to him for most of his life. And sometimes that creates distance that can't be crossed." The words settled between them, heavy with implication. Eleanor understood what he wasn't saying, that he feared the same fate for Sam, that the burden of premature responsibility could twist a child into someone unrecognizable. "What would you suggest?" she asked quietly. "Let me try something." Silas met her eyes. "Tomorrow. With Sam. If you're willing." Eleanor hesitated. Every maternal instinct screamed to protect her son, to shield him from any more pain or disappointment. But something in Silas's expression, something raw and understanding, made her reconsider. "What did you have in mind?" "The yearlings need exercising. It's work that requires skill, but isn't dangerous. And it's work that matters real contribution to the ranch, not make work to keep a child busy." "Sam's never worked with horses." "He'll learn." Silas's voice carried quiet certainty. "If he's willing." Eleanor thought about her son, his desperate need to be useful, to prove his worth, to be seen as something other than a burden. Maybe that was exactly what he needed, Real responsibility, real trust. Talk to him, she said finally. But if he says no, then I'll respect that. Silas nodded once. I won't force anything on your children, Eleanor. That's not who I am. The next morning, Eleanor watched from the kitchen window as Silas approached Sam in the yard. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she could read their body language. Sam's defensive posture, arms crossed, chin raised. Silas's calm stance unhurried, giving the boy space. Rosa appeared beside her, following her gaze. He's good with children, better than he thinks. Was he always? No. Rosa's voice softened. Before Elizabeth died, he was lighter. He laughed, made jokes, played with the ranch children like a boy himself. She shook her head. After he closed himself off, said it was easier not to care. But he took us in. Yes. Rosa turned to look at Eleanor directly. That's the first time in 4 years he's let anyone past his walls. I don't know what he saw in you and your children, but something broke through. Outside, something shifted in Sam's posture. His arms uncrossed. He was listening now, really listening as Silas gestured toward the barn. He's considering it, Eleanor murmured. The boy needs purpose. Senor Blackwood understands that. Rosa returned to her bread dough. Men, even young ones, they need to feel useful. It's how they know they matter. Eleanor watched as Sam nodded slowly, then followed Silas toward the barn. Her heart clenched with a complicated mixture of hope and fear. I pray you're right, she said quietly. 3 hours later, Sam burst into the kitchen with flushed cheeks and bright eyes. Mama, I led a yearling around the whole paddock by myself. Mr. Blackwood said I had good hands. Said some people work with horses their whole lives and never develop good hands, but I have them naturally. Eleanor caught him in her arms, overwhelmed by the transformation. This was her Sam, the eager, excited boy who had disappeared 8 months ago. That's wonderful, sweetheart. And tomorrow he said I can help with the feeding, and next week maybe I can learn to check their hooves and... Sam stopped suddenly, his excitement dimming. Is that okay? I know I should be helping you and Rosa instead. Sam? Eleanor cupped his face in her hands. This is exactly where you should be. Mr. Blackwood needs help with the horses and you're providing it. That's important work. Really? Really. The smile that broke across Sam's face was worth every fear Eleanor had swallowed to let him try. That evening after dinner, Silas caught Eleanor's eye across the table and nodded slightly. A silent acknowledgement that they had made the right choice. Eleanor nodded back, something warm settling in her chest. Maybe she could trust him. A little. For now. The second week brought a new challenge. Eleanor was in the kitchen, helping Rosa prepare lunch, when hoofbeats sounded in the yard. She looked up to see Silas striding toward the door, his expression shifting from neutral to guarded. Stay inside, he said without looking at her. Who is it? Whitmore. The name sent ice through Eleanor's veins. She moved to the window despite Silas's warning, watching as Cornelius Whitmore climbed down from an expensive carriage that had no business being on a ranch road in winter. Mrs. Caldwell, Whitmore's voice carried across the yard, deliberately loud. I've come to check on your welfare. The town has been concerned since your sudden departure. Silas positioned himself between the carriage and the house. She's not available. I wasn't speaking to you, Montgomery. Whitmore's smile didn't reach his eyes. Surely the lady can speak for herself. Eleanor's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to hide, to let Silas handle this, to pretend Whitmore didn't exist. But that wasn't who she was. That wasn't who Daniel had married. She walked outside. Mr. Whitmore. Her voice was steady. I appreciate your concern, but as you can see, my family is well cared for. Are they... Whitmore's gaze swept over her, the clean dress, the healthy color in her cheeks, the lack of desperation that had marked her for months. You've certainly landed on your feet, though some might wonder at what cost. Meaning, a widow, 3 children, living in the home of a bachelor rancher. Whitmore spread his hands. Surely you can see how that might appear to concerned citizens. What appears, Silas cut in his voice flat and dangerous, is that Mrs. Caldwell is employed as my household manager, a position with proper wages, proper quarters, and proper oversight from my housekeeper, who has been with this household for 12 years. Employed. Whitmore's smile sharpened. How convenient, and how quickly arranged. Mr. Whitmore? Eleanor stepped forward, drawing his attention back to her. I spent 8 months in Thunder Creek after my husband's death. 8 months begging for work, for shelter, for basic human decency. Do you know how many job offers I received? I'm sure the circumstances were difficult. None. Eleanor's voice hardened. Not one, unless you count your offer, which we both know wasn't about employment. Something ugly flickered across Whitmore's face before he smoothed it away. I was trying to help. If you misunderstood my intentions, I understood perfectly. Eleanor held his gaze without flinching. And I declined. That's my right, Mr. Whitmore. Just as it's my right to accept legitimate employment when it's offered. The town will talk. The town has been talking since Daniel died. They talked while my children starved. They talked while I begged for scraps. Their talk didn't help us then, and it doesn't concern me now. Whitmore's expression shifted surprise, perhaps at finding steel where he'd expected submission. He glanced at Silas, then back at Eleanor, reassessing. Very well, Mrs. Caldwell. I can see you've made your choice. He moved toward his carriage. I do hope you don't come to regret it. Is that a threat? Merely an observation. Whitmore climbed into the carriage, then paused. Montgomery, your reputation in this territory isn't as unassailable as you seem to believe. People are already asking questions about your recent decisions, unconventional arrangements, isolation from the community. Some might say erratic behavior. Some might say a lot of things. Silas's voice was ice. None of it your concern. Everything in Thunder Creek is my concern. Whitmore smiled. I'm the banker after all. I hold the notes on half the businesses in town. Amazing how much influence that provides. He signaled his driver and the carriage rolled away. Eleanor stood rigid until it disappeared over the hill, then let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He'll be back, Silas said quietly. I know. He won't give up easily. Men like Whitmore, they don't accept rejection. I know that too. Eleanor turned to face him. I'm sorry. I've brought trouble to your door. You haven't brought anything I can't handle. Silas's expression remained steady. Whitmore and I have been circling each other for years. This just gives him an excuse to move faster. What does he want from you? The same thing he wants from everyone. Control. Silas started walking back toward the house. My land sits on the most direct route for the new railroad spur. He's been trying to acquire it for 3 years. And you won't sell? I built this ranch from nothing. Buried my wife and son in that hill behind the barn. His voice tightened, almost imperceptibly. No amount of money would make me give it up. Eleanor fell into step beside him, processing this new information. He'll use us against you, me and the children. He'll twist our presence into something ugly. Probably. That doesn't concern you. Silas stopped walking, turning to face her. What concerns me is that your children have enough food, that your son is learning to work with horses instead of learning to beg, that your daughter is reading books instead of shivering in the cold, that your baby is alive. His gray eyes met hers directly. Whitmore's opinions don't factor into that equation. Eleanor studied him, this complicated man who hid kindness behind coldness, who spoke more to her children than to adults who had pulled her family from the edge of death without asking for anything in return. Why? She asked. The real reason. Not the debt to Daniel, not the empty house not needing a housekeeper. Why did you really stop that night? Silas was quiet for a long moment. The wind picked up swirling snow around them, but neither moved toward the warmth of the house. Because I know what it feels like to fail the people you love, he said finally. To watch them slip away and know you couldn't save them. Elizabeth. His voice caught so briefly Eleanor almost missed it. I couldn't save her. Couldn't save our son. And for 4 years I've been living with that. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? His jaw tightened. I was the one who brought her here away from her family and doctors and everything familiar. I was the one who thought we could build a life in the wilderness. When she went into labor early, there was no one who could help. No one with the skills to... He stopped, visibly collecting himself. You were kneeling in the snow. He continued, his voice steadier. Praying for your children's lives. And I thought, if I can't undo my own failures, maybe I can prevent someone else's. The raw honesty of his confession stole Eleanor's breath. She understood suddenly why the townspeople called him cold. It wasn't cruelty or arrogance. It was armor. Protection against a world that had already taken everything he loved. I was a midwife, she said quietly. Before Daniel. During the war and after. I've delivered hundreds of babies, saved mothers that doctors had given up on. Silas looked at her, something shifting in his expression. If I had been here, Eleanor continued, when Elizabeth went into labor. Don't. His voice was rough. Don't do that. It wasn't your fault either. No. But it connects us, doesn't it? Your loss and mine. Your guilt and mine. She held his gaze. Maybe that's why you stopped. Not just to save my children, but because you recognized something. Saw someone fighting the same battle you've been fighting. Silas didn't respond, but something in his eyes, something that had been locked away since she'd met him, cracked open just slightly. We should go inside, he said finally. Rosa will have lunch ready. He walked away before Eleanor could say anything else. But he had heard her. She knew he had. The third week brought revelation. Eleanor was in the library cataloging books at Silas's request when she found the letters. They were tucked behind a row of agricultural texts, bundled together with a faded ribbon correspondence bearing the letterhead of the Pacific Western Railroad Company. She shouldn't have read them. She knew that. But Daniel's name caught her eye on the first page, and before she could stop herself, she was scanning the contents. The words blurred together. Investment, safety concerns, cost analysis, delayed improvements, and then, clear as day. We appreciate your investment in Pacific Western, Mr. Blackwood, and assure you that the proposed safety modifications will be implemented as soon as financially feasible. Current operations remain within acceptable risk parameters. The letter was dated 3 months before Daniel's death. Eleanor's hands began to shake. Silas had invested in the railroad that had employed Daniel, the railroad whose negligence had killed him. Eleanor, she spun. Silas stood in the doorway, his expression shifting from curious to concerned as he saw her face. What's wrong? She held up the letters. Her voice came out strange, disconnected. You invested in Pacific Western. Silas went very still. You invested in the company that killed my husband. Eleanor. Did you know? Her voice rose. When you stopped your wagon that night, did you know? Yes. No hesitation. No excuse. Just the single word, heavy with admission. Eleanor felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. The man who had saved her children, who had given them shelter and food and safety, he had helped fund the company whose negligence had made her a widow. I should have told you. Silas moved into the room but stopped when Eleanor stepped back. I should have told you the first night. But you were so worried about Tommy and then... Then what? It never seemed like the right time to mention you helped kill my husband. I didn't kill Daniel. His voice was strained. The investment was financial. I had no involvement in daily operations, no knowledge of the safety issues until after 14 men died. Eleanor's hands clenched around the letters. After my husband spent 3 days trapped in frozen water. After I watched him die slowly because his lungs were too damaged to... Her voice broke. The letters fell from her fingers as she pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold herself together. I'm sorry. Silas's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. Sorry doesn't bring him back. She lowered her hands, her cheeks wet. Sorry doesn't give my children their father. Sorry doesn't undo any of it. I know. Then why? She stared at him, desperate to understand. Why take us in? Why help us? Because you felt guilty. Because we're some kind of penance for your sins. Partly. He didn't flinch from the accusation. Partly because I owed Daniel a debt I could never repay. Partly because your children deserved better than to freeze to death because of decisions made in boardrooms 1,000 miles away. And partly. Silas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw in a way Eleanor had never heard. Because I wanted to. Because I saw you fighting for your family with everything you had, and I recognized that fight. Because your children reminded me of what I'd lost and what I might... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. What I might still have, if I wasn't too broken to reach for it. Eleanor wanted to rage at him, wanted to scream and throw things and demand justice for Daniel. But underneath the anger was something else, the same complicated grief she'd been carrying for months. The knowledge that blame was rarely simple, that guilt rarely lived in only one heart. I need time, she said finally. To think, to decide what this means. Take whatever time you need. Silas's voice was defeated in a way she'd never heard. If you want to leave. I didn't say that. Eleanor wiped her eyes roughly. I said I need time. Those aren't the same thing. Something flickered in his expression. Hope maybe, or fear. The children, Eleanor continued. They don't need to know about this. Not yet. Whatever I decide, they've finally started to feel safe. I won't take that from them. Agreed. Eleanor bent to retrieve the scattered letters, her movements mechanical. I'm going to finish cataloging the library. We can talk more tonight, after dinner. Silas nodded once, then turned and left without another word. Alone in the library, Eleanor sank into the nearest chair and let herself fall apart. Just for a moment. Just long enough to grieve this new loss, the simple trust she had been beginning to feel, the uncomplicated gratitude that had made each day easier. Nothing was uncomplicated anymore. Maybe nothing ever had been. But her children were safe. Tommy was healthy. Sam was smiling again. Grace was reading books she never would have accessed in Thunder Creek. Did the reason matter? Did it change the reality of what Silas had given them? Eleanor didn't know, but she had until tonight to figure it out. The dinner that evening was tense. The children, oblivious to the undercurrents, chattered about their days. Sam's progress with the yearlings, Grace's discovery of a book about frontier women, Tommy's attempts to feed himself with a spoon. Eleanor responded with appropriate enthusiasm, while acutely aware of Silas's silence across the table. Rosa noticed. Of course Rosa noticed. But she said nothing, simply clearing dishes with her usual efficiency and shepherding the children toward their bedtime routines. When the house finally fell quiet, Eleanor found Silas in his study, staring into the fire. May I come in? He turned, his expression carefully neutral. Of course. Eleanor closed the door behind her and took the chair across from his. For a long moment, neither spoke. I've made a decision, she said finally. Silas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm listening. When Daniel died, I blamed a lot of people. The railroad company, the foreman who ignored safety warnings, the investors who prioritized profits over lives. She held his gaze. I blamed God. I blamed myself for not being there, as if my presence could have somehow prevented a bridge from collapsing. Eleanor, let me finish. She raised a hand. Blame is easy. It gives grief somewhere to go, something to do, besides just hurt. But blame doesn't bring anyone back. It doesn't feed hungry children or keep them warm. It doesn't undo the past. Silas remained silent, waiting. You invested in a railroad company. You didn't design the bridge that collapsed. You didn't make the decision to delay safety improvements. You didn't know Daniel or his crew or the specific conditions that killed them. Eleanor's voice steadied. You're guilty of putting money into a company that operated negligently. That makes you complicit, maybe. But it doesn't make you a murderer. Some would say there's no difference. Some would be wrong. Eleanor leaned forward. You pulled my children from the snow. You sat up all night helping save Tommy's life. You gave Sam purpose and Grace books, and Tommy a chance to grow up. Those aren't the actions of a man without conscience. I was trying to atone. I know. And maybe that's not the purest motivation. Maybe it's selfish in some way I can't quite articulate. She paused. But my children are alive because of your selfishness. I'll take that trade. Silas stared at her, something breaking open behind his eyes. You're staying. I'm staying, for now, through spring like we agreed. Eleanor stood suddenly exhausted. But Silas, no more secrets. If there's anything else I should know, tell me now. I can handle hard truths. What I can't handle is being blindsided. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, there's nothing else. Not about Daniel. Not about the railroad. Good. She moved toward the door. Then we start fresh tomorrow. Not as strangers, not as debtor and benefactor. As two people trying to make the best of difficult circumstances. Eleanor. His voice stopped her at the threshold. Thank you. For understanding. For... Don't thank me yet. She glanced back. We have a long winter ahead. Plenty of time for both of us to mess this up. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. Fair enough? Eleanor left him sitting by the fire, her heart heavy but somehow lighter at the same time. The road ahead was still uncertain. Whitmore was still circling. The children still needed her constant attention. And Silas Blackwood was still the most complicated man she'd ever met. But they had an understanding now. Something built on honesty rather than assumption. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The fourth week at Blackwood Ranch brought something Eleanor hadn't expected. Normalcy. She woke each morning before dawn, helped Rosa prepare breakfast, and watched her children scatter to their various tasks. Sam to the horses with Tobias, Rosa's son, and the ranch foreman. Grace to the library with her stack of books. Tommy to whoever would hold him, which lately meant everyone. The rhythm of it was almost peaceful, almost like having a home again. You're smiling. Rosa observed one morning, catching Eleanor staring out the window at nothing in particular. Am I? First time since you arrived. Rosa handed her a cup of coffee. It looks good on you. Eleanor took the cup, warming her hands against the ceramic. I'd forgotten what it felt like. To not be afraid every moment. Fear takes energy. You were running on empty for too long. Rosa returned to her bread dough. Now you have reserves again. Your body remembers how to hope. Is that what this is? Hope? What else would you call it? Eleanor didn't have an answer for that. The morning passed quickly, filled with the ordinary tasks that had become familiar. Laundry. Mending. Helping Rosa prepare the midday meal for the ranch hands. Eleanor found satisfaction in the work and the tangible results of clean clothes and full bellies. She was hanging sheets on the line behind the house when she heard it. A woman's scream, high and terrified, cutting through the cold air. Eleanor dropped the sheet and ran. She found the source at the bunkhouse. Maria, the wife of one of the ranch hands, was clutching her swollen belly and gasping for breath. Her husband, Carlos, knelt beside her, his face white with panic. The baby, Maria gasped. It's coming. It's too early. How early? Eleanor was already kneeling, her hands moving automatically to assess the situation. 6 weeks. Maybe 7. Carlos's voice shook. We were going to travel to town next month for the birth. We didn't think, it's all right. Eleanor kept her voice calm, even as her mind raced. 6 weeks early. In winter. Miles from any doctor. Maria, I'm going to help you. I was a midwife before I came here. I've delivered hundreds of babies. Maria's terrified eyes found hers. The doctor in town said I might have trouble. Said my hips were narrow and... I've handled narrow hips before. Eleanor turned to Carlos. I need hot water, clean cloths, and someone needs to tell Rosa what's happening. I'll go. Tobias appeared in the doorway, already moving. "What else?" "My bag. In my room under the bed. It has my supplies." Tobias nodded and ran. For the next hour, Eleanor worked. She talked Maria through contractions, monitored the baby's position, and prepared for every complication she could anticipate. The early labor was concerning, but the baby seemed strong, and Maria's body, despite her fears, was progressing normally. Silas arrived halfway through, drawn by the commotion. He stood in the doorway, taking in the scene without interrupting. "What do you need?" he asked quietly. "More light, and something for her to grip during contractions." He disappeared, returning minutes later with oil lamps and a thick rope. Eleanor positioned the rope over Maria's head, giving her something to pull against, while Silas arranged the lamps without being asked. "You've done this before," Eleanor observed. "Field medicine, during the war." His voice was tight. "Different circumstances, but similar principles." Maria screamed as another contraction hit. Eleanor focused entirely on her patient, guiding, encouraging, watching for any sign of trouble. "I can't," Maria sobbed. "I can't do this." "You can." Eleanor gripped her hand. "You're already doing it. Your body knows what to do. Trust it." "The baby's too small. It won't survive." "I've seen smaller babies survive." Eleanor held Maria's gaze. "I've seen babies born in the middle of battlefields who grew up to be strong men. Your baby is fighting. You need to fight too." Something shifted in Maria's expression. Fear gave way to determination. "Tell me what to do." "Push." The next 30 minutes were intense. Maria pushed. Eleanor guided. Silas held lamps and passed supplies without being asked, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood crisis. And then, suddenly, it was over. A thin wail filled the room. Eleanor lifted the tiny baby, checking airway color, breathing. Small but strong. Lungs working. Heart beating. "It's a girl." Eleanor's voice caught. "A beautiful, perfect girl." Maria was crying. Carlos was crying. Even Silas, standing in the corner with his lamps, had something suspiciously bright in his eyes. Eleanor cleaned the baby quickly, wrapped her in the warmest cloth available, and placed her in Maria's arms. Mother and daughter stared at each other, the world narrowing to that single point of connection. "Thank you." Carlos gripped Eleanor's hand, his gratitude almost painful in its intensity. "Thank you. You saved them." "Maria did the hard work. I just helped." "You saved them," he repeated. "We won't forget." The rest of the day passed in a blur of aftercare and monitoring. Eleanor checked on Maria and the baby every hour, watching for complications, ensuring both were stable. By evening she was exhausted but satisfied. Mother and daughter were doing well. The early delivery had been frightening, but the outcome was good. She was washing her hands in the kitchen when Silas found her. "How are they?" "Strong. Both of them." Eleanor dried her hands slowly. "The baby's small, but she's breathing well. Nursing well. Maria's recovering." "You were remarkable." The simple statement, delivered without elaboration, made Eleanor's cheeks warm. "I did my job. You did more than that." Silas moved closer. "You stayed calm when everyone else was panicking. You gave Maria hope when she'd lost it. You saved 2 lives today, Eleanor." "I've saved lives before. It's what midwives do." "It's what you do." His gray eyes held hers. "Daniel wasn't wrong about you. Strongest woman in the territory." The mention of Daniel sent a complicated feeling through Eleanor's chest. Pride. Grief. Something else she couldn't name. "I should check on them again," she said, breaking the moment. "It can wait 10 minutes. Silas gestured to the table. "Sit. Eat something. You've been running since Maria screamed." "I'm fine." "You're exhausted, and you won't help anyone by collapsing." He pulled out a chair. "Please." Eleanor sat too tired to argue. Silas placed a plate in front of her, soup and bread that Rosa must have left warming, then settled into the chair across from her. "Eat," he instructed, She ate. The soup was good, warm, and filling, and she realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast. The silence between them was comfortable now, different from the tense early days. Something had shifted since their conversation about the railroad. Not quite trust, but something approaching it. Carlos and Maria have been with the ranch for 3 years, Silas said eventually. They've wanted a baby the whole time. Maria had 2 miscarriages before this pregnancy. She didn't mention that. She wouldn't. She's proud. Silas's voice softened. When she got pregnant again, they were terrified. Didn't tell anyone until she was showing. Didn't make plans because they didn't want to jinx it. That's why they hadn't arranged for a doctor. Partly. Also because Dr. Holloway isn't exactly reliable, and the nearest competent physician is in Cheyenne. Eleanor thought about the fear Maria must have carried for months, about the isolation of ranch life and the distance from help. They should have told someone. I could have been monitoring her, watching for problems. They didn't know you were a midwife. I didn't tell them. Silas met her eyes. I should have. That's my fault. Why didn't you? Because I didn't want them treating you differently, like an employee rather than a guest. He paused. And because I wasn't sure how long you'd stay. Didn't want them depending on skills that might disappear come spring. The honesty of the admission struck Eleanor. He'd been protecting his people, trying to manage their expectations. But he'd also been protecting her, keeping her options open. I'm not leaving, she said quietly. Not in spring. Not unless something changes. Silas went very still. You've decided? I decided weeks ago. I just hadn't said it out loud. Eleanor set down her spoon. My children are happy here. Healthier than they've been in a year. Sam is becoming himself again. Grace is devouring every book in your library. Tommy is thriving. And you? The question hung in the air, simple and complex at once. I have purpose here, Eleanor said carefully. Meaningful work. People who respect what I can do. She held his gaze. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Something shifted in Silas's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Then we should formalize the arrangement. Proper contract. Clear terms. So you know exactly where you stand. And where do I stand? Household manager. Medical care for the ranch and surrounding homesteads. Room and board for you and the children, plus wages. He paused. Partner if you're willing. In the running of this place. Partner. Eleanor repeated the word, testing its weight. That's more than employee. It's more than I've offered anyone since Elizabeth died. Silas's voice was quiet. I'm not good at this, Eleanor. At trusting people. At letting them in. But you've proven yourself 100 times over in the past month. I'd be a fool not to recognize that. Eleanor studied him, this complicated man, who hid kindness behind coldness, who showed care through action rather than words. She thought about Daniel, about the life she'd lost, about the future she'd never imagined. I have conditions, she said. Name them. I want to offer medical services to the neighboring ranches. Women who need midwife care, children who get sick, families too far from town to reach a doctor. Agreed. You'll need transportation. And I want Sam to continue working with the horses, not just as a favor, but as a real apprenticeship, teaching him skills he can use. He has talent. Tobias says so. Silas nodded. We'll make it official. And Grace needs a proper education, more than just reading. Mathematics, history, science, everything I can teach her and more when she's ready. The library is hers. I'll order more books from Denver. Eleanor took a breath. One more condition. The hardest one. And I need you to be honest with me. About everything. The railroad, your finances, any threats to this ranch or my family. No more secrets. Silas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I haven't been honest with many people, Eleanor. It's not in my nature. I know. But I can try, for you. He met her eyes. I can try to be the man you're asking for. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to examine. "Then we have a deal," Eleanor said softly. She extended her hand. Silas took it. His grip was warm and firm, his palm calloused from years of work. They held the handshake a moment longer than necessary, something passing between them that neither acknowledged. "I should check on Maria," Eleanor said, withdrawing her hand. "I'll come with you." They walked to the bunkhouse together side by side in the darkness, and Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, not quite happiness, but something close to both. News of the birth spread quickly. By the end of the week, 3 families from neighboring homesteads had sent word asking if the Blackwood midwife would be available for consultations. By the end of the second week, Eleanor had made 2 house calls treating a child's fever and examining a pregnant woman who'd been anxious about her upcoming delivery. "You're becoming famous," Rosa observed, watching Eleanor pack her medical bag for another call. "Hardly famous, just useful." "In this territory, that's the same thing." Rosa handed her a wrapped package. "Food for the journey. Mrs. Patterson always forgets to feed her guests." "Thank you. Be careful on the road. Tobias says there's been strangers around. Men who don't look like ranchers." Eleanor paused. "What kind of strangers?" "The kind who ask questions about Blackwood Ranch. About Senor Silas." Rosa's expression was worried. "About you." The information settled uneasily in Eleanor's stomach. "I'll be careful." The Patterson homestead was an hour's ride from the ranch. Eleanor made the journey on a gentle mare. Silas had selected specifically for her use, enjoying the weak winter sunshine, despite her underlying worry. The strangers Rosa mentioned were almost certainly connected to Whitmore gathering information for whatever scheme he was planning. Mrs. Patterson welcomed her warmly, leading her to a back bedroom where a young woman lay pale and frightened. The examination took an hour, but Eleanor's conclusion was reassuring. A healthy pregnancy, normal progression, no complications expected. "You're sure?" Mrs. Patterson pressed. "The doctor in town said there might be problems." "Dr. Holloway says that to everyone. It covers him if something goes wrong." Eleanor smiled gently. "Your daughter is healthy. Her baby is healthy. She should deliver without difficulty in about 6 weeks." The relief on both women's faces was worth the long ride. On her way home, Eleanor took the scenic route following the creek that wound through Blackwood property. The water was frozen solid, the banks covered in pristine snow. Beautiful country, she thought. Harsh, but beautiful. She was halfway to the ranch when she saw the rider. He was waiting on the trail ahead, positioned where she couldn't avoid him without leaving the road entirely. As she approached, her stomach clenched. Cornelius Whitmore. "Mrs. Caldwell." He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "What a pleasant surprise." "Mr. Whitmore." Eleanor kept her voice level. "You're far from town." "Business takes me many places." He guided his horse alongside hers, forcing her to either stop or ride uncomfortably close. "I heard about your heroics last week, delivering a baby in the middle of a blizzard. Quite impressive." "It wasn't a blizzard, and I did my job." "Modest, too." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've made quite a name for yourself in a short time. The Blackwood midwife. People speak highly of you." "I'm glad to be of service." "Are you?" Whitmore's tone sharpened. "Because from where I stand it looks like you're getting comfortable, settling in, making long-term plans. Is that a problem?" "It could be." He moved his horse closer, crowding her. "You're building a life on a foundation that might not be as stable as you think, Mrs. Caldwell. Silas Blackwood isn't the man you believe him to be. And you are. I'm a practical man. I see opportunities and I take them. I see threats and I neutralize them." His voice dropped. "Right now you're an opportunity, but you could very easily become a threat." "Is that supposed to frighten me?" "It's supposed to make you think." Whitmore reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "This is a draft petition, questioning Silas Montgomery's mental competence, raising concerns about his recent decisions, his isolation from the community, his increasingly erratic behavior. Eleanor's blood ran cold. That's absurd. Is it a wealthy bachelor rancher takes in a homeless widow and her 3 children in the middle of the night, installs her in his home, gives her access to his household, his finances, his operations? Whitmore's smile turned predatory. Some might call that generous. Others might call it evidence of impaired judgment. No court would take that seriously. You'd be surprised what courts take seriously when the right evidence is presented. He held out the petition. Read it. You'll find it quite thorough. Eleanor didn't take the paper. What do you want, Whitmore? The same thing I've always wanted, Blackwood Ranch, or at least the portion of it that the railroad needs. He tucked the petition back into his coat. Silas has been obstinate for years, refuses to sell, refuses to negotiate. But if he were declared incompetent, his affairs would be managed by a court-appointed guardian, someone more reasonable. And you expect to be that guardian. I expect to suggest appropriate candidates, yes. Whitmore's pretense of pleasantry dropped entirely. Here's my offer, Mrs. Caldwell. Leave Blackwood Ranch, take your children and go. I'll provide funds for your travel enough to establish yourself somewhere far from Wyoming territory. And if I refuse, then you become part of the petition, evidence of Blackwood's compromised judgment. His voice hardened. And your children become witnesses, removed from your care while the courts determine whether you're a fit mother. The threat landed like a physical blow. Eleanor's hands tightened on the reins, fighting to keep her voice steady. You would use my children against me. I would use whatever tools are necessary to achieve my goals. Whitmore guided his horse back. Think about my offer, Mrs. Caldwell. You have until the end of the week. After that, the petition moves forward with or without your cooperation. He rode away without waiting for a response. Eleanor sat motionless on her horse, watching him disappear, her heart pounding with rage and fear. Whitmore was serious. The threat to her children was real, and she had no idea how to stop him. She rode back to the ranch in a daze, her mind racing through possibilities. Tell Silas. Hire a lawyer. Flee before the petition was filed. Each option carried risks she couldn't fully calculate. Silas was waiting in the yard when she arrived, his expression concerned. You're late. Rosa was worried. I was delayed. Eleanor dismounted, her legs unsteady. We need to talk. Privately. Something in her tone must have alarmed him. He took the horse's reins and handed them to a nearby hand, then guided Eleanor toward the house with a hand at her elbow. What happened? Not here. In his study with the door closed, Eleanor told him everything. Whitmore's ambush, the petition, the threat to remove her children. Silas listened in absolute silence. When she finished, his expression was stone. He said you have until the end of the week. Yes. Then we have time. His voice was flat, controlled, dangerous. Not much, but enough. Enough for what? To prepare. Silas moved to his desk, pulling out paper and pen. Whitmore isn't the only one with connections in this territory. I've been building alliances for 15 years. It's time to call in some favors. What kind of favors? The kind that will make his petition look like the desperate grab for power it is. He began writing, his hand moving quickly across the paper. I need you to do something for me. Anything. Silas looked up, his gray eyes intense. I need you to go back to Thunder Creek. Not alone, Tobias will accompany you. Talk to Dr. Holloway. Talk to the people you've helped since coming here. Gather statements about your character, your skills, your fitness as a mother. You want me to build a defense? I want us to build a defense. Together. He held her gaze. This fight involves both of us now. We face it together or not at all. The words echoed something she'd said to him weeks ago. We face it together. There's something else, Eleanor said quietly. Something that might help, or might make things worse. Tell me. Whitmore's bank holds notes on half the businesses in Thunder Creek. He uses them as leverage, threatens foreclosure if people don't cooperate. She took a breath. But leverage works both ways. If those business owners knew they weren't alone, if they knew someone would stand with them against Whitmore, they might find their courage. Silas nodded slowly. You're suggesting we organize opposition. I'm suggesting we remind people that there are other options besides submission. A ghost of a smile crossed Silas's face. Daniel was right about you. Strongest woman in the territory. Strategic thinker. He returned to his letter. We start tomorrow. You take Thunder Creek. I'll contact the Ranchers Association and the territorial representative. Whitmore wants a fight. His jaw tightened. He's going to get one. That night, Eleanor lay awake in her bed listening to the wind howl outside. In the next room, her children slept peacefully, unaware of the threat gathering around them. She thought about Daniel, about the future he'd imagined for them. He'd wanted safety and stability, a life built on honest work and simple pleasures. He would have hated what Whitmore was doing, would have hated even more the impossible choice she now faced. But Daniel was gone, and Eleanor was still here, still fighting, still protecting their children with whatever weapons she had. Tomorrow, the battle would begin in earnest. She was ready. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of action. Eleanor rode into Thunder Creek with Tobias, her heart pounding with each mile that brought them closer to the town that had rejected her. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't begging. She was fighting. Dr. Holloway was her first stop. She found him in his office, surprisingly sober, reviewing patient files with the focused attention of a man reclaiming his profession. Mrs. Caldwell. He rose when she entered, genuine warmth in his greeting. I heard about the Patterson delivery. Excellent work. Thank you. I need your help, doctor. His expression sharpened. What kind of help? Eleanor explained the situation without embellishment. Whitmore's threat, the petition, the danger to her children and to Silas. Holloway listened in silence, his face growing darker with each revelation. That bastard, he said when she finished. Pardon my language, ma'am, but that's what he is. Can you help? I can provide a formal assessment of Silas Blackwood's mental competence. Examined him myself last month when he came for his regular checkup. Holloway pulled out paper and began writing. Sound of mind sharp as ever, no evidence of impairment of any kind. I'll swear to it in court. That will help. But I need more. Holloway looked up. What else? I need to know who else Whitmore has threatened. Who else might be willing to stand against him if they knew they weren't alone? The doctor was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his desk and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. Eleanor's heart sank, but instead of drinking, he set it on the desk between them. See this, I haven't touched it in 6 weeks. Know why? No. Because Whitmore used my drinking against me, threatened to have my medical license revoked if I didn't cooperate with his schemes. Sign off on documents I shouldn't sign. Look the other way when I should ask questions. Holloway's jaw tightened. I've been a coward for too long, Mrs. Caldwell. Maybe it's time I found my spine. Does that mean you'll help? It means I'll give you names. He began writing again. Henderson at the Mercantile, Wilson at the feed store, the Reverend Crane who's been fighting Whitmore's influence on the church board for years. They're all scared, but they're also all tired of being scared. Eleanor took the list, hope kindling in her chest. Thank you, doctor. This means more than you know. Just stop that snake before he poisons everything good in this territory. Holloway handed her his assessment. And tell Blackwood I said he's lucky to have you fighting for him. Not many women would stand up to Whitmore like this. Not many women have as much to lose. The visits that followed were harder. Some people refused to see her. Others listened, but were too afraid to commit. But a surprising number said yes. Yes to written statements. Yes to testifying if needed. Yes to finally standing against the man who had controlled their town for too long. By the time Eleanor returned to the ranch that evening, she had 17 signed statements and promises of more to come. Silas was waiting in his study papers spread across his desk, his expression tense. How did it go? Eleanor handed him the stack of documents. Better than I expected. Holloway's on our side. So are Henderson Wilson and at least a dozen others. Silas flipped through the statements, something like surprise crossing his face. You did this in one day. People are tired of being afraid. Eleanor sank into the chair across from him. They just needed someone to go first. And you went first. I had the most to lose. Silas set down the papers, his gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. There's something I need to tell you. What? I received word from my lawyer in Cheyenne. Whitmore has accelerated his timeline. The petition has already been filed. The hearing is set for 5 days from now. The news hit Eleanor like cold water. 5 days. That's not enough time. It's enough if we're strategic. Silas pulled out a fresh document. I've been working on a counter-petition. Character witnesses' business records, medical assessments. Everything we need to prove Whitmore's claims are baseless. Will it be enough? Against the petition alone? Yes. Silas's jaw tightened. But there's a complication. What kind of complication? Whitmore has also filed a separate petition regarding your fitness as a mother. Claims your living situation constitutes moral endangerment of your children. He's requesting they be removed from your care pending investigation. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. He can't. He can't just take my children. He can try. And with Judge Porter in his pocket, he might succeed temporarily. Then what do we do? Her voice cracked. I won't let them take my children, Silas. I'll die first. You won't die, and they won't take your children. He moved around the desk, crouching before her chair, so they were eye level. There's a solution. One that would invalidate Whitmore's moral endangerment argument completely. Tell me. Silas took a breath. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. If we were married, the question of impropriety becomes moot. You would be my wife living in our home, raising our children together. No court could claim moral endangerment in a lawful marriage. The word hung in the air between them. Marriage. You're asking me to marry you. I'm offering you protection. Silas held her gaze. Legal protection for your children. Social protection for your reputation. The kind of protection that Whitmore's schemes can't touch. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Something flickered in his eyes. Something raw and uncertain. I know this isn't how proposals are supposed to happen. I know you deserve better than a strategic arrangement born of crisis. But I don't know how else to... Silas. He stopped. You're asking if I'll marry you to protect my children. But I need to know something first. Eleanor leaned forward, her hands finding his. Is that the only reason you're asking? The question seemed to strike him like a physical blow. He was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs tracing unconscious patterns across her knuckles. No, he said finally. It's not the only reason. Then tell me the other reasons. Because I haven't felt alive since Elizabeth died, until you walked into my house. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual control. Because your children have filled rooms that have been empty for 4 years. Because every morning I wake up grateful that you're here, and every night I fall asleep afraid you'll leave. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Because you're the strongest woman I've ever known, Silas continued, and the kindest and the most maddening. Because when you argue with me, I feel like I'm finally talking to someone who sees me clearly. Because... He stopped, his jaw working. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor Caldwell, and I don't know what to do with that. The confession so unexpected from this guarded man stole Eleanor's breath. You love me. I'm falling in love with you. There's a difference. A ghost of his usual dryness returned. Though I admit the distinction is getting harder to maintain. Eleanor stared at him, this complicated, wounded, unexpectedly tender man, who had pulled her from the snow and given her a home. She thought about Daniel, about the love they had shared, about the future that had been stolen from them, and she thought about the future that was being offered now. My children, she said quietly. They need to know, need to understand what this means. Of course. We'll tell them together if you're willing. And if they say no, if Sam can't accept you as a stepfather? Silas's expression softened. Then we find another way. I won't force this on your family, Eleanor. That's not who I am. I know. She squeezed his hands. I know who you are. Is that a yes? It's a, let me talk to my children. But... She hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek. It's closer to yes than no. Silas's sharp intake of breath was gratifying. I'll take it, he said hoarsely. The children were gathered in the library, Grace reading Tommy playing with blocks, Sam pretending to read while actually watching his siblings. They looked up when Eleanor and Silas entered together. Family meeting, Eleanor announced. Everyone sit down. Sam's eyes narrowed with suspicion. He knew something was happening. He'd been watching the adults closely for days, reading tension in their postures and silences. What's wrong? He demanded. Nothing's wrong. Eleanor sat on the sofa, pulling Tommy into her lap. But something important is happening, and you all need to hear about it. Is it about the bad man? Grace asked. The one who came to the ranch? Partly. Eleanor glanced at Silas, who nodded encouragement. Mr. Whitmore is trying to cause trouble for our family. He's filed papers with the court that say I'm not a good mother. That's a lie. Sam jumped to his feet. You're the best mother in the whole territory. I know, sweetheart, and so do the people who matter, but the court doesn't know me. They might believe Mr. Whitmore's lies unless we can prove otherwise. How do we prove it? Sam's hands clenched into fists. I'll tell them. I'll tell everyone. Sam. Silas's quiet voice cut through the boy's rising fury. Sit down. Let your mother finish. Something in his tone made Sam obey, though his jaw remained tight with anger. There's a way to make Mr. Whitmore's claims much weaker, Eleanor continued carefully. A way that would protect all of us. But it's a big change, and I won't do it without your agreement. What kind of change? Grace asked. Eleanor took a breath. Mr. Blackwood has asked me to marry him. Silence. Grace's eyes went wide. Tommy, oblivious, continued playing with his blocks. Sam sat frozen, his expression unreadable. Marry him? Sam repeated flatly. You want to marry him? I'm considering it, because it would protect us and because... Eleanor glanced at Silas. Because I care for him. Very much. What about Papa? The question struck like a blow. Eleanor reached for Sam, but he pulled back. You're just going to replace him like he never existed. No. Eleanor's voice was firm, despite the pain in her chest. I'm not replacing your father. No one could ever replace Daniel. He was the love of my life, and he gave me you three, which means he gave me everything that matters. Then why? Because life goes on, Sam. Even when we lose people we love. Because your father would want us to be safe, to be happy, to have a future. Tears burned in Eleanor's eyes. He would want me to protect you by any means necessary. And he would want you to have someone to look up to, someone to teach you the things he can't teach you anymore. Sam's defiance cracked. Underneath was grief, raw and fresh, despite the months since Daniel's death. I miss him, Sam whispered. Every day I miss him. I know, baby. I miss him too. He was supposed to teach me to ride. He promised. Sam's voice broke. He promised he'd be there. Silas moved then, crouching before Sam, the same way he had with Eleanor earlier. Sam, look at me. Slowly, the boy raised his eyes. I can't be your father. I won't try to be. Daniel was your father, and nothing will ever change that. Silas's voice was low, steady. But I can be someone who teaches you to ride. Someone who shows you how to work with horses, how to run a ranch, how to be a man. Not instead of your father, but in addition to him. Why do you care? Sam demanded. We're not your family. You could be. Silas held his gaze. If you let me. If you give me a chance. Sam. Grace's small voice broke the tension. "Mr. Blackwood saved Tommy's life. He taught us to skate. He reads me stories every night." She looked at her brother with solemn eyes. "Papa's in heaven, but Mr. Blackwood is here. Maybe that's okay." Out of the mouths of babes, Eleanor thought. Sam was silent for a long moment. Then slowly his rigid posture softened. "You really love my mother?" "Yes." No hesitation. "I really do. And you'll protect us, all of us, no matter what. With my life." Sam studied Silas with the measuring gaze of a child who had learned too young not to trust easily. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he finally nodded. "Okay, you can marry her." A hint of his old spirit flickered. "But if you ever make her cry, I'll—" "Sam." Eleanor's voice held a warning. Let him finish. Silas said, his lips twitching. "I'll make you sorry." Sam crossed his arms. "I don't know how yet, but I will." "Noted." Silas extended his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Sam considered the offered hand. Then, with the gravity of a much older person, he shook it. "Deal." The wedding happened 2 days later. It was simple by necessity, held in the ranch's main hall, with Reverend Crane officiating. Rosa had somehow produced flowers, hothouse blooms, that Silas must have ordered from Cheyenne weeks ago, though he denied any romantic foresight. Eleanor wore a blue dress that had belonged to Elizabeth, altered by Rosa to fit perfectly. Silas had offered it hesitantly, uncertain whether the gesture would comfort or offend. "She would have wanted it used," he'd said. "She hated waste." "Then I'm honored to wear it." The ceremony itself was brief. Vows exchanged rings placed a kiss that was chaste, but held promise of more. The children stood as witnesses, Tommy in Rosa's arms, Grace beaming, Sam solemn but present. Afterward, there was cake and celebration, ranch hands clapping Silas on the back and congratulating Eleanor with genuine warmth. Carlos and Maria brought baby Esperanza, now thriving despite her early arrival, as a symbol of hope and new beginnings. By evening, the guests had departed, the children were asleep, and Eleanor found herself alone with her husband for the first time. "Wife," Silas tested the word. "That's going to take some getting used to." "Husband," Eleanor smiled. "Likewise." They were in his study, the fire burning low, each holding a glass of wine they had barely touched. The comfortable intimacy of the moment was new and strange. "Tomorrow," Silas said quietly. "The hearing." "I know." "Are you afraid?" "Terrified." Eleanor set down her glass. "But also ready. We've done everything we can. The rest is up to the judge. Porter's been in Whitmore's pocket for years. He might not be impartial. Then we'll appeal, fight higher, keep fighting until we win or run out of courts." She met his eyes. "I didn't survive the last year to give up now." Silas reached across the space between them, taking her hand. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something." "What?" "This marriage, these past weeks, you and your children in my home." He paused, searching for words. "It's been the first time in 4 years that I've felt like myself. The first time I've wanted a future, instead of just enduring the present." "Silas." "Let me finish." His grip tightened. "If Whitmore wins tomorrow, if the worst happens, I will spend every resource I have fighting for your children. I'll hire every lawyer in the territory. I'll take it to the territorial governor to Washington if I have to. You will not lose them, Eleanor. I swear it on my life." The fierce conviction in his voice undid something in Eleanor's chest. She rose from her chair and moved to his, settling onto the arm and cupping his face in her hands. "I believe you," she said softly. "And I need you to believe something too." "What?" "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm glad I married you. Not just for protection. Not just for the children." She leaned down, pressing her forehead to his. "For you. For us. For whatever this is becoming." Silas's breath caught. "Eleanor." She kissed him. Not the chaste brush of lips from the ceremony, but something deeper, something that spoke of possibility and promise. He responded instantly, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, the other wrapping around her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathless Silas's eyes were dark with emotion. "We should get some sleep," he said hoarsely. "Tomorrow will be long." "Probably." "I had Rosa prepare the adjoining room for you. No pressure, no expectations. Whatever you're comfortable with." Eleanor considered this. Considered the man before her who had shown her more consideration in a few weeks than most people showed in a lifetime. "The adjoining room is fine," she said. "For tonight." Something flared in his eyes at the implication. "And after tonight, we'll see." She pressed one more kiss to his lips. "We have time now, Silas. All the time we need." She left him sitting by the fire, his expression a mixture of longing and contentment that made her heart ache in the best possible way. Tomorrow they would face Whitmore. Tomorrow they would fight for their family. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eleanor went to sleep feeling genuinely, completely safe. And loved. That too. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and clear. Eleanor dressed carefully, choosing the same blue dress she had worn for the wedding. It felt like armor, now a reminder of everything she had gained, and everything she was fighting to protect. Silas was already waiting in the hall when she came downstairs, dressed in his finest suit, his expression set in the controlled calm she had come to recognize as his battle face. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." The children had been left with Rosa, despite Sam's fierce protests that he should be there to defend his family. Eleanor had promised to tell him everything when she returned. She prayed she would have good news to share. The ride to Thunder Creek felt endless. Eleanor's stomach churned with anxiety, her mind cycling through every possible outcome. Silas said little, but his hand found hers halfway through the journey and didn't let go. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. Word had spread about the hearing, and it seemed half the town had turned out to witness the confrontation. Eleanor recognized faces in the crowd, some hostile, some sympathetic, most simply curious. Cornelius Whitmore stood near the front of the room, flanked by two lawyers in expensive suits. He smiled when he saw Eleanor, a predator's smile that made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Blackwood," he emphasized the new name. "How delightful. I see congratulations are in order." "Mr. Whitmore." Eleanor kept her voice level. "I'd say it's nice to see you, but my mother taught me not to lie." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at her boldness. Good. Let him underestimate her. Judge Porter entered through a side door, and the room fell silent. He was older than Eleanor had expected, with a weathered face and tired eyes. The eyes of a man who had made too many compromises with his conscience. "This hearing will come to order." Porter's voice was flat, emotionless. "We are here to address two petitions filed by Mr. Cornelius Whitmore. The first concerns the mental competency of Mr. Silas Blackwood. The second concerns the parental fitness of Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, formerly Caldwell." "Your Honor." Silas's lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Harrison, who had arrived from Cheyenne 2 days earlier, rose to his feet. "Before we proceed, I would like to submit documentation that directly addresses both petitions." Porter frowned. "What documentation?" "Marriage certificate, Your Honor. My clients were married 3 days ago by Reverend Josiah Crane. This union eliminates any question of impropriety regarding Mrs. Blackwood's living situation." Whitmore was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, this marriage is clearly a transparent attempt to circumvent legitimate concerns." "The marriage is legally binding and properly documented," Harrison interrupted. "Any claims of moral endangerment based on living arrangements are now moot." Porter examined the certificate, his expression unreadable. "The marriage appears to be in order. Mr. Whitmore, do you wish to amend your petition regarding Mrs. Blackwood's fitness?" "I do not." Whitmore's voice was sharp. "The concerns go beyond living arrangements. Mrs. Blackwood has a history of vagrancy, of exposing her children to dangerous conditions." Objection. Harrison didn't wait for permission. Mrs. Caldwell's difficult circumstances following her husband's death are a matter of public record. She was denied assistance by this very community forced into desperate measures through no fault of her own. That's precisely my point. Whitmore turned to address the room. A woman who would allow her children to live behind a feed store to beg for scraps to nearly die of exposure. A woman who did everything in her power to survive after this town abandoned her. Eleanor's voice cut through the courtroom stronger than she'd expected. A woman who was offered help by only one person in 8 months, and that offer came with conditions no decent woman would accept. Whitmore's face reddened. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Mr. Whitmore. I'm stating plainly that you offered me shelter in exchange for becoming your mistress. That when I refused, you threatened to make my life impossible. Eleanor stood facing the room. That is the man who now claims to be concerned about my children's welfare. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eleanor saw shock on some faces, knowing nods on others. The truth was ugly, but it was also powerful. These are outrageous accusations, Whitmore sputtered. Lies from a desperate woman. I can corroborate them. Dr. Holloway rose from his seat in the gallery. Mrs. Caldwell came to me after Mr. Whitmore's proposition. She was shaken but resolute. I advised her to stay far from him. As can I. Henderson from the Mercantile stood. I was present when Whitmore made similar suggestions to the widow Patterson last year. She left town rather than accept his terms. More voices joined the chorus. One by one, people who had been silent for too long began to speak. Stories of coercion, of threats of debts called in, and businesses destroyed when Whitmore didn't get what he wanted. Judge Porter's gavel banged repeatedly, trying to restore order. Silence. This is a hearing about Mr. Blackwood's competency, not Mr. Whitmore's character. With respect, Your Honor, they're connected. Harrison remained calm. Mr. Whitmore's petition is not motivated by genuine concern for Mr. Blackwood's welfare. It's motivated by his desire to acquire Blackwood Ranch, specifically the land the railroad needs for its new spur. That's irrelevant, Whitmore began. It's entirely relevant. Harrison produced a stack of documents. I have here correspondence between Mr. Whitmore and the Pacific Western Railroad Company, negotiating terms for land acquisition. Land he doesn't own. Land he could only access if Mr. Blackwood were declared incompetent and his affairs placed under guardianship. Porter's eyes widened. Let me see those. As the judge reviewed the documents, the courtroom erupted in whispered conversations. Eleanor felt Silas's hand on her back steady and reassuring. This is circumstantial, Whitmore insisted, but his voice had lost its certainty. Business discussions are not evidence of conspiracy. Then perhaps you can explain this. Harrison produced another paper. A draft agreement between yourself and Judge Porter, outlining financial arrangements, contingent on favorable rulings in this case. The silence that followed was absolute. Porter's face went gray. He opened his mouth closed. It opened it again. No sound emerged. Forgery, Whitmore said quickly. An obvious forgery. It bears your signature, Mr. Whitmore, and Judge Porter's, both verified by a handwriting expert from Denver. Harrison's voice was ice. Would you like me to call the expert to testify? This hearing is adjourned. Porter's voice cracked. He was already rising, already moving toward the door. Your Honor. A new voice stopped him. Everyone turned to see a distinguished man in a federal marshal's uniform standing at the back of the room. I'm afraid I can't allow that. Who are you? Porter demanded. Deputy Marshal Thomas Kane, Territorial Office. The marshal moved forward, 2 armed men flanking him. I have warrants for the arrest of Cornelius Whitmore and Judge William Porter on charges of conspiracy, bribery, and fraud. The room exploded into chaos. Eleanor watched in stunned disbelief as Whitmore was seized by the marshals. His face had gone from red to white, his composure completely shattered. This is outrageous, he screamed. Do you know who I am? I'll have your badge. You'll have a cell, Kane replied calmly. Same as Judge Porter here. Porter didn't resist as they took him. He seemed to have aged 20 years in the space of minutes, his shoulders slumped, his eyes empty. How? Eleanor breathed to Silas. How did you... Richard. Silas's voice was quiet. My brother in San Francisco. He has connections in the territorial governor's office. When I told him what was happening, he made some calls. You didn't tell me. I wasn't sure it would work. Didn't want to give you false hope. He squeezed her hand. But I've been preparing for this for weeks, just in case. Harrison approached, his usually composed face split by a grin. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, I believe we can safely say the petitions against you have been dismissed. What happens now? Eleanor asked. Now Judge Porter is removed from the bench. A new judge will be appointed to review any cases he's ruled on. Whitmore's assets will likely be frozen pending investigation. Harrison's grin widened. I expect quite a few people in Thunder Creek will be very relieved to learn their debts might be reassessed. Eleanor looked around the courtroom at the shocked faces, the dawning hope, the tears of relief. She saw Henderson shaking hands with Wilson, saw Dr. Holloway actually laughing, saw ordinary people who had lived under Whitmore's shadow for years suddenly standing straighter. It's over, she said softly. It's over. Silas turned her to face him. You're safe. The children are safe. We're safe. Eleanor threw her arms around him, not caring who saw, not caring about propriety or appearances. He caught her, held her, buried his face in her hair. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for that night in the snow, for believing I was worth saving. You saved yourself. His voice was rough. I just provided the wagon. She laughed, tears streaming down her face. I love you, Silas Blackwood. The words came easily, naturally, as if they had always been waiting to be spoken. Silas pulled back just far enough to look at her. His gray eyes, so often cold and guarded, were bright with emotion. I love you too, Eleanor Blackwood. He kissed her right there in the courtroom with half the town watching. God help me, I love you too. The ride back to the ranch felt like flying. Eleanor couldn't stop smiling, couldn't contain the joy bubbling up inside her. Everything she had feared, everything that had kept her awake at night, was gone. Whitmore was in custody, the children were protected, the future stretched before them wide and bright and full of possibility. Sam was waiting in the yard when they arrived, his face tight with anxiety. Well, he demanded before they had even dismounted. What happened? Did we win? We won. Eleanor swept him into her arms. It's over, Sam. We're safe. Really? He pulled back, searching her face. The bad man can't hurt us anymore. The bad man is going to prison. Silas dismounted, coming to stand beside them. For a very long time. Grace came running out next, followed by Rosa carrying Tommy. Within moments, Eleanor was surrounded by her children, all of them talking at once, demanding details, needing reassurance. One at a time, she laughed. Let me breathe. The celebration that followed was the happiest night Eleanor could remember since before Daniel's death. Rosa prepared a feast. The ranch hands were given the evening off to join them. Music and laughter filled the house until well past midnight. At one point, Eleanor found herself alone on the porch, looking out at the snow-covered ranch that had become her home. The cold air felt clean, purifying. A fresh start in every breath. There you are. Silas appeared beside her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. I thought you might have escaped. Just thinking. About what? About how strange life is. Eleanor leaned into him, drawing warmth from his solid presence. A year ago, Daniel was alive. I had a home, a life, a future I understood. Then everything fell apart. And now I have a different home, a different life, a different future. She looked up at him. It's not what I planned. It's not what I expected. But somehow it's exactly what I needed. Silas was quiet for a moment. Do you ever regret it? Getting in my wagon? Never. The word came without hesitation, not for a single moment. Even knowing about the railroad, about my connection to Daniel's death. You didn't kill Daniel, Silas. Negligence and greed killed Daniel. You've done nothing but try to make amends since then, and not just to me." She touched his face. "You're a good man. It took me a while to see past your walls. But once I did, I found someone worth knowing, worth loving." He turned his head, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not." She smiled. "But you're stuck with me now." "Is that a promise?" "That's a vow." She rose on her toes and kissed him. "Till death do us part, and all that." The winter passed slowly, as winters do. But for the first time in years, Silas didn't mind. His house was full of life now, children's laughter. Eleanor's singing, the thousand small sounds of a family in motion. He watched Sam grow from a wary, burdened child into a confident young man with a natural gift for horses. Watched Grace devour every book in his library and begin demanding more. Watched Tommy take his first steady steps, then his first running leaps, filling the ranch with his exuberant energy. And he watched Eleanor transform from a desperate survivor into something magnificent. She built a medical practice that served homesteads for 50 miles in every direction. She trained 2 young women in midwifery. She saved lives that would otherwise have been lost to the unforgiving frontier. At night, she came home to him, to their bed, their life, their future. And every morning, Silas woke grateful for the snowstorm that had brought her to him. Spring arrived with its usual violence, melting snow and swelling creeks, transforming the frozen landscape into something green and alive. Eleanor stood on the porch, watching her children play in the muddy yard, and felt something she had almost forgotten: complete happiness. "Penny, for your thoughts." Silas appeared beside her, coffee cup in hand. "I was thinking about Daniel." He stiffened slightly. "Oh, not like that." She took his hand. "I was thinking about what he would say if he could see us now, see the children thriving, see me happy." "What do you think he'd say?" "I think he'd say thank you." Eleanor's voice was soft. "For saving his family when he couldn't, for giving his children a father figure, for loving his wife the way she deserves to be loved." Silas was quiet for a long moment. "I hope so. I hope wherever he is, he knows I'm trying." "He knows." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "And so do I." A shriek of laughter drew their attention. Sam had somehow ended up in a mud puddle, with Grace dancing around him triumphantly, and Tommy toddling toward the mess with obvious intent to join. "Should we intervene?" Silas asked dryly. "Probably." Eleanor made no move to leave the porch. "But they're having so much fun. Rosa will kill us. Rosa will forgive us." She leaned against him. "She always does." They watched their children play, covered in mud and joy, and Silas felt the last frozen piece of his heart finally thaw. 4 years of grief, of isolation, of believing he would never feel whole again, all of it melted away in the spring sunshine. "Eleanor." "I have something to tell you." She looked up, concern flickering across her face. "What is it?" "Nothing bad." He smiled, and the expression still felt new on his face, even after months of practice. "I had a letter from Richard yesterday. He's coming to visit this summer, wants to meet my new family." "Is that a good thing?" "I think so." Silas paused. "I also heard from Jonathan, my brother in Chicago, the minister." "The one you haven't spoken to in years?" "The same." He took a breath. "He's getting married. Asked if I would come to the wedding." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Silas, that's wonderful." "He also asked if I would bring my wife and children." The words came slowly, as if he was still processing them. "He called Sam Grace and Tommy my children, in his letter, like it was the most natural thing in the world." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. "That's because it is the most natural thing in the world. They are your children, Silas. Maybe not by blood, but by choice, by love. I want to make it official." The words rushed out before he could second-guess them. "Legal adoption, if you'll allow it, if Sam will allow it." "Have you talked to Sam?" "Not yet. I wanted to ask you first." Eleanor studied him, this man who had been a stranger 6 months ago and was now the center of her world. The man who had earned her children's trust one patient day at a time. The man who had proven through action rather than words that family was about choice as much as blood. "Ask him," she said. "I think you'll be surprised by the answer." Silas found Sam in the barn that afternoon, brushing down the yearling that had become his particular responsibility over the winter. The horse named Storm, for obvious reasons, had started wild and unpredictable. Under Sam's patient attention, he had become one of the most reliable animals on the ranch. "Got a minute?" Silas asked. Sam set down his brush, immediately alert. "Is something wrong?" "No, something right, I hope." Silas moved to lean against the stall door, putting himself at Sam's level. "I want to ask you something important, and I want you to know that whatever you answer it won't change anything between us." "Okay." Sam's expression was wary but curious. "I've been thinking about the future, about what this family looks like going forward." Silas chose his words carefully. "Your mother and I are married. We're building a life together. But there's something missing. Something legal. I don't understand. Right now I'm your stepfather. That's a real relationship, but it's not the same as—" He paused. "I want to adopt you, Sam. You and Grace and Tommy. Make you my children legally. Give you my name if you want it." Sam was very still. "You want to adopt us?" "If you'll have me." "But—" The boy's voice cracked. "What about my father? My real father? Daniel was your real father. He'll always be your real father." Silas crouched down, meeting Sam's eyes. "I'm not trying to replace him, Sam. I'm trying to add to what you already have, to give you someone who will protect you legally, who will make sure you and your siblings are always taken care of, who will be there when you need a father's guidance. You already do all those things. Because I want to. But if something happened to me, if I died tomorrow, you and your siblings would have no legal claim to anything here. No protection. No inheritance. I want to fix that." Silas paused. "I want to make sure that no matter what happens, you belong here. Officially. Permanently." Sam was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "Would I have to change my name?" "Only if you want to. You could stay Sam Caldwell forever, and I would love you just the same. But I could be Sam Blackwood if I wanted. If you wanted." Sam's lower lip trembled. For a moment he looked like the frightened boy Silas had first met huddling behind a feed store in a blizzard. Then he launched himself into Silas's arms. "Yes?" he said, his voice muffled against Silas's chest. "Yes, I want that. I want to be your son. I want us to be a real family." Silas held him tightly, feeling tears he hadn't expected prick at his eyes. "We already are a real family, Sam. This just makes it official." "Okay." Sam pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Okay. Let's make it official." The adoption was finalized on a bright June morning. The same courthouse where Whitmore had tried to destroy them now witnessed their permanent union as a family. Sam Grace and Thomas Blackwood signed their names, or in Tommy's case, made a smudgy thumbprint on documents that would bind them together forever. Eleanor watched her children become Blackwoods and felt her heart overflow. This wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the life she had chosen, and she would choose it again 1,000 times over. Afterward, they gathered on the courthouse steps for a photograph. Eleanor in her blue dress, Silas in his best suit, Sam standing tall and proud, Grace beaming, Tommy squirming to get down and explore. "Hold still," the photographer instructed. "Just one more moment." Eleanor looked at her family, at the man she loved, at the children who carried pieces of her heart in their small bodies, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The camera flashed. The moment was captured forever. That evening, after the celebration had wound down and the children were finally asleep, Eleanor and Silas sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. Their land now legally and completely for as long as they both lived and beyond. Thank you, Eleanor said softly. For what? For stopping your wagon that night. For seeing something in us worth saving. For opening your heart when you had every reason to keep it closed. She turned to face him. For choosing us. Silas pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her hair. I didn't choose you, Eleanor. I recognized you. The moment I saw you kneeling in that snow praying for your children, I knew. Knew what? That you were the one I'd been waiting for. His voice was rough with emotion. That everything I'd lost, everything I'd suffered, had been leading me to that moment. To you. Eleanor looked up at the sky, painted in shades of gold and rose, and felt peace settle into her bones. Not the peace of giving up, but the peace of arriving. Of finally being home. No more storms, she whispered. No more storms. Silas agreed. Just us. Just this. Just forever. And as the last light of the sun painted the mountains in gold, Eleanor Blackwood closed her eyes and let herself believe in happy endings. Because sometimes when you've walked through fire and kept walking, when you've lost everything and rebuilt from ashes, when you've found love in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected person, you earn your happily ever after. Eleanor Caldwell. Blackwood had earned hers, and she intended to live every moment of it to the fullest, surrounded by the family she had fought for, the home she had found, and the man whose wagon had changed everything on the coldest night of the year. Some stories end with a kiss. This one ended with something better. This one ended with a family gathered around a fire, safe and whole and together. This one ended with the certain knowledge that no matter what tomorrow brought, they would face it united. And that was more than enough. That was everything.